Hello, hello, hello to everyone who's joining us. Please do reach out in the chat and say hi. Tell us where you're joining us from. It's great to feel a little bit less alone. We're just going to wait just a few minutes, not a few minutes, sorry, just a few moments, give people a chance to sign in, and then we will be getting started. Hi, Aiden. Hi, Savannah. Great to have you.
Southern California, represent. Hello.
While you're waiting, do feel free to scan the code here on the screen to follow us on LinkedIn. That way you can stay up to date with all our latest product updates, content, webinars like this one, all those good things. Okay, well, let's get started. So hello, Frank and Nathan, and hello to everyone in the audience joining us today. I am your host. My name is Natalie, and I'm part of the marketing team here at CoderPad. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today as we talk about mitigating cheating within the tech recruitment process. Before we dive in, I wanted to quickly share some practical information. So first things first, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Alice, or CoderPad, as you see her here. Hi, Alice. She's working behind the scenes today, making sure that everything is running smoothly. So if you do need help with anything at all, you can reach out to her in the chat. Secondly, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and that you will receive the recording in the next couple of days. Finally, there will be some time for a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them in the Q&A tab. You can do so at any time throughout the webinar, and we will try our best to answer them all. So after this quick introduction, we will meet our experts and then we'll get stuck in. We'll share insights and advice, a little bit of a product show and tell, and finally, we will answer your questions live. So that's more than enough from me. Let me introduce you to our pros. I'm joined today by Nathan Sutter and Frank Hoban. Panel, do you think you could tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with Nathan and then Frank.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nathan, also in Southern California, Los Angeles. I'm a back-end engineer by trade. I've been building and growing teams for in the engineering space for well over 10 years at this point. At everything from really, really small, couple people startups to mega corporations, teams of hundreds of people, and everything in between. So, as you can expect, hopefully I've got my pulse on things impacting developer roles and developer productivity, and that's certainly what we're going to be talking about here. So nice to meet y'all, Frank.
Hey everyone, so I lead CoderPad's product team. I'm located not in SoCal, but in the other side, NorCal, so up in the SF Bay Area. We look down quite literally on the people in SoCal. Brief professional, I guess, used to work prior to working in tech, worked at a smattering of other industries to include finance, was in the military once upon a time. And like most product folks have navigated around tech, been in B2B SaaS, B2C, and did my fair share of hiring back in the day. And so, as Nathan likes to talk about it, we love what we're working on because we are essentially building things for ourselves. And so, we are building things and speaking to our former selves and the pains that we experience that you all experience in terms of trying to hire technical talent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to have the VP dream team here today. And fun fact, I think I didn't say where I was based. I'm based in the south of France, in Montpellier. So it's great to have everybody here from all over. I think so. We're going to get right to it, but I do think that we need to kick off this discussion with just a teeny bit of context before we get straight to some more practical discussions. So I'm going to start by asking the two of you, why is it that cheating is such a concern today in technical hiring?
I guess I'll go first and then let Nathan round it out. So I think the thing that's on everyone's mind and is in every single conversation that we have with customers nowadays, it's the age of AI. And so as AI continues to get better and spits code back at you or does your spreadsheet for you for those analytical roles, the worry out there is identifying who did what, was it the human, was it the machine? It's a continuation of the conversation that's been going around for years, but I think this is similar in a way of what, if you look beyond hiring, what other industries are dealing with in terms of universities, high schools. And so that's really to the forefront and a lot of the conversation nowadays. And so this has always been something on people's minds, but I think that's put an extra, I guess, criticality to it.
Mm,
Yeah, I think really cheating is always a concern from a hiring standpoint because the last thing you want to do is hire someone who has either just copied and pasted a bunch of code and therefore probably wouldn't be able to perform on the job. But I think it's heightened now because you've got systems that are mostly helpful to developers that can be used potentially to subvert an honest interview process. And I think, we hear from every single customer that we talk to concern about, how do we become aware, when this happens? How do we mitigate some of that? How do we, and what do we do in our interview process to make sure that we can get good signal in the age of all of these tools being available. So I think that's really the focus for us, and it's where Frank and I spend a lot of our headspace is figuring out what to build in product and sort of how to position the products for so that our customers can do all those things that they want to do.
mm. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great transition. I think it's sort of what you can put in place within that context. Obviously for us, there's a major focus on how we can build sort of those cheat mitigation features, tools into our product, how we can best support our customers. And I think there's also on the other side, internally, our customers, companies that are hiring, they're sort of looking to see what kind of policies they can put in place, what kind of documentation or training or support to sort of align their teams. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what an anti-cheat policy looks like. What does a good anti-cheat policy look like? And maybe what advice can we offer to people who are either building one or wanting to improve what they have? Yeah, what would you share? What kind of advice could you share?
Yeah, I'll start, Frank, since you went first last time. So I think really the answer is it depends on what you care about, right? So one of the things we hear from customers are everything from we want candidates to be able to use all of the tools available to them, all the way towards, hey, we consider usage of any assistance, whether it's Google searches, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Copilot, to be some form of cheating. So I think the first thing, and by the way, that there's never going to be one answer for this, right? This is going to be different sizing for every customer. So I think really coming up with an anti-cheating policy is, between TA and the engineering team, is really being clear about, what do we consider inside your organization to be good practice, and what do we consider to be something that we don't want candidates to do in either a top of funnel screen or something closer down to a live interview. So really setting expectations both internally and then with candidates. It's just as important, right? Like the last thing you want to do is have a candidate show up to any type of interview, whether it's a screen or a live interview, and them not be clear about what tools they can and cannot use, right? So being clear about internally with your candidates. I would say then your process should follow all of those things, right? So you should have like little points throughout the entire funnel to make sure you're internally aligned, you're aligned with your candidates, and everybody's very clear about what can and can't be used in the interview process. And that extends to obviously to AI related tools, but that extends to other tools in development as well, right? Like that's everything from do we want to enable syntax highlighting or not, and also do we want to have candidates be able to use ChatGPT in a live interview or not, and everything in between. I'll take a breath, and I'm sure Frank has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just as Nathan's kind of describing, it's different tools. It starts with setting clear expectations, but different tools can apply at different points of your interview process. Maybe stage one is completely open book, and stage two is closed book, or vice versa. But setting that very clear expectation, and it doesn't need to be a one size fits all across the funnel. It just befits the stage and sometimes even the type of role they're hiring for. But ultimately, being as clear as possible sets the right context for the candidate.
Hmm.
Nathan threw out, maybe using ChatGPT, and there's all sorts of opinions out there. But yeah, just having that clarity of like, is this an open book? Can you use outside tools or not? And then similarly, these are the things that we monitor and look for. I think we err on the side, philosophically, of just being as transparent as possible. If you leave, we have tools put in place in our products, and just being clear to the candidate, if you leave the tab, that's something we monitor for. And so I
Hmm.
think just setting that ground, that threshold from the beginning, so there isn't this mysteriousness of like, I don't know
Hmm.
what's okay or what's not okay. And having that be as clear as possible. I think ultimately a lot of this comes to life. I think we all understand, written policy and being clear, and these are kind of fundamental. But this also comes to life within the products that you choose. And what I mean by that is, one of the things we espouse and we encourage candidates to come and encourage our customers to encourage their candidates to come sign up for a free trial, actually get a view of
Yeah.
our products and see what it's like. So there isn't this, well, you said I can't use this and I don't know what's going on. And embedded even within that, within this test that we send out, we have a tutorial. And so I think that's another hallmark of something that, is not quite the policy of anti-cheating, but again, brings it to life of like, how do you set the right expectation so that somebody can come in with eyes wide open of what that interview or that async screen will be like.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about sort of candidate communication, what you communicate to candidates, how, when, in what format. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I think Alice, if you're listening, we have a great resource on, I think it's called a self-assessment guide. How effective is your cheating strategy? Something like that. It's on our blog, and it's sort of going back to what both of you have mentioned about what does cheating mean to you? What are your expectations? It sort of gives you guides you through that sort of thought process of how do we align as a company, what's important to us, what are our hiring goals, where are we actually um, encountering this problem, how do we identify how we need to build something that's good for us, that meets our needs. Like you said, Nathan, I think it's very much each company needs their own their own sort of policy that fits their needs. I'm going to share here. I have a slide I'm going to share here. This is sort of the same content that's in the article if you do want to go and check that out. But the article sort of guides you through that foundational discussion, and then part of the or structure that we sort of suggest or that we think could help you to frame that as part of a policy is to think about how you prevent, detect, and respond to cheating or to suspicious activity. And the way that we've split it up is that you have things that you should do for every role all the time. It's like your questions should always be based on real life scenarios. Like you should always use like custom code, language agnostic questions. There should always be that possibility. There should always be variety in the formats that you use. It's like the foundation that's building the foundation for an assessment process that is, I don't want to say cheat proof, but that is going to sort of minimize that risk. And then you've got sort of the basic flagging features that you can sort of have always on and that will help you to identify anything that might need a little bit more investigation. And then you have your high risk areas that I think the discussion that you have foundationally to decide sort of what are your goals, where do you actually have problems? Is it actually we're only encountering cheating when we're hiring for junior roles or when we're hiring in this geography? Like where are you actually having those, like seeing those sort of higher risk areas? And are there things that you can toggle on for those areas of hiring. And then there's sort of things that you maybe don't want to have on all the time, but that maybe you need to have on a per role basis. So there are some of the features that are listed here. And I think that sort of gives you a framework or a structure to think, okay, it's like, how am I going to prevent, detect, respond? And what do I need to have on all the time? And what do I need to toggle on to adapt to my hiring situation and my hiring context, and where I'm actually coming across cheating? Obviously, if you have that foundational discussion and you're like, actually, I mean, we hear people talking about cheating, but we've never actually come across it. Maybe you don't need a policy. But in any case, you need to identify where it will be useful, and where you can put some energy into it. Does that make sense, Frank? Nathan, is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, I guess, maybe to go from like less theoretical high level, Nathan, I mean, we certainly we're hiring, we're using our tools all the time, our products all the time. So we have our stance. Would you mind kind of sharing your thoughts on where we stand with different tools and usage?
Yeah, I mean, part of our role here is hopefully being advocates to, getting customers to have the best interview process imaginable, and using our tools to make that process happen. So when you think about, what best practice looks like for interviewing, you think about what is the signal you want to get out of interviews, right? The signal you want to get out is, do I think this person is a good fit for the role that I have open, right? And in order to get that signal, you want to give them access to all of the tools that they're going to be able to use on the job, right? And so one of the, some of the tools are like, modern IDEs, they're going to be using autocomplete. They're going to be using a bunch of debug features. They're going to be using, normal multi-file environments and whatever their IDE of choice is, and also, whether we want to believe it or not, ChatGPT and other resources are a totally normal part of developer day to day at this point, unless you have a very strict policy internally. Some companies have like, very much, you can't use AI for anything policies. We absolutely recommend our customers allow candidates to use AI in the assistive way that they would on a day-to-day basis in the role that you're hiring for. So just to round it back out again, give them all the tools that they would have on the job is really and that will give you the best signal and give you all of the data that you need to make a decision on whether this person would be a good fit in the role or not.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, sorry, Natalie,
Go ahead.
I think that speaks a little bit to our philosophy is, our goal with our products is to make the interview experience as close to what it is like to work as possible. And so I think oftentimes, how we try and vector people into, well, yeah, but you need so much context, it takes months to come up to speed. I'd often say try and bring into an interview the task that you would give somebody on their first week on the job. And so that's usually a very realistic problem. You're not hiring somebody and having them work on something fake or something, that doesn't apply. And so if you take that construct, I think how we look at that within our products is that we built products that allow you to have access to all these tools in a monitored environment. And so we have built in an AI assist tab so you can ask those things you actually ask in real life. I need a little bit of help with this. I need a reminder on syntax, or I can't quite remember, how to do X, Y, or Z. But then we actually record and we show that in a transparent way so that both the interviewer and the candidate, are seeing everything all at once. And then we're also monitoring to make sure that when the candidate leaves the tab, or if the candidate's coming in from a weird geography or anything like that, that we are also surfacing that. And again, so our goal here is to enable both ways of having that monitored environment, but also enabling somebody to actually use the tools they use on a daily basis, and not, I think, bringing them into an interview or a test with, it feels like sometimes you have one or both arms tied behind your back, and it's just this very strange experience that's divorced from what you do.
And one thing to add really quickly, and some of the almost objections we get from customers when we present that to them is okay, great. If I have a candidate using ChatGPT in a live interview, wouldn't they be able to copy and paste their way through an interview? And the answer is, it's almost the opposite, right? If you have somebody who is wants to cheat their way through an interview, they will copy and paste something into the pad to run through in an interview setting, but it'll be very, very obvious very quickly that they can't expand upon that, expand or dig into that, into what
Hmm.
they've moved into the pad to solve. And I think it almost gives you a much quicker signal about who maybe can't expand upon ideas that are presented to them, whether it comes from ChatGPT or Google or whatever. It doesn't really matter. If they use something that assists them, and they use that in an interview, then they can't expand upon it. That is a really, really clear signal, really, really quickly. So it almost is, the objection is, isn't this just, cheating their way through an interview? If you have a good, interviewing team, like, they're going to dig into that immediately, and you'll get that signal a lot quicker than you would otherwise, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that so what we talk about a lot is like you've both said, trying to make it as close as possible to an on-the-job experience, as realistic as possible. So we talk a lot about realistic assessments, and how actually having that sort of assessment, whether it's a coding test or a coding interview, making those as realistic as possible is also a really good way to make them as cheat resistant as possible, because like you say, you dig into them and they need to be able to develop, like, to explain their thought process, and there are a lot of different things. So can we get into that a little bit about sort of what do we mean by realistic? What makes a coding assessment realistic or cheat resistant? um I'm going to share my screen. I think I have some notes on this, but I'd love to know for both of you, like, what's the most important thing? What makes it the most like a real job experience? What would you highlight?
I think Frank talked about this a little bit earlier. Is you want to give them something that is as close to, their first or second week on the job as possible. And so imagine the polar opposite of that is like leak code type questions, right? Leak code type questions, ChatGPT and other, Google can solve those all
Mhm.
day long, right? So you want to give them a question or a project that is as close to something that's relevant to the role, relevant to the company that you're at, as possible. So it gives them a relevant problem to solve, which is good for candidate experience, right? It feels good to them. It's relevant to you, and also sort of it goes a long way to, to getting to the point where questions are not necessarily easy, but scare quotes, easy to cheat through, right? Like,
Mm,
the closer you get to something that's realistic, the more interactivity and the more digging into things that you're going to need, and the more back and forth you're going to need on an interview. So, Frank, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is ultimately, and thank you, Natalie. You're providing a nice visual guide for all of us. But if we're talking about some of these realistic scenarios and problem types, but then also the within that realistic question, again, there shouldn't be in the real world. There is no one solution, and
mm,
it's the absolute only thing that you do. Um, I think oftentimes when we look at that, that's probably a trigger of this is not a great question to ask, to be honest, in an interview. And usually it's something that has potentially different paths to the solution. It's somewhat open-ended, and then you
mm,
have the possibility or potential to continue to dig in. And that's the point that Nathan made a few minutes ago of like, well, what if somebody's just copying and pasting? Like, I think that's where you would want to dive in and say, well, why did you choose this approach? And tell me, what would you do next? And okay, now we need to scale this up to billions of users because
mm,
we're the largest social media platform. And so how would you do that? And what would you want to consider? And I think these are the types of uh, questions that you would then follow up to, again, round out an understanding somebody's problem solving approach and how they think. And so both in our live product, a human would be equipped to ask that. And then in our async product, we have features such as like a follow-up question that allows we generate some of these abilities to ask these follow-up questions on the fly, and then the candidate has to actually fill out and show and expose why they chose a different path, or why they were thinking in this way.
Mm. No, absolutely. I think so. A lot of these that are on the screen now, we've touched on, we've mentioned some of them we've um, discussed a bit in a bit more detail. I think I'd call out one that maybe we haven't gotten into that I really like. It is specific to interviews, but the the way that you communicate um instructions, specifications, like I think making that realistic, making it like it would be on the job, like what would your spec look like, what format would it be, and then leaving room for candidates to ask questions, to ask clarifying questions. So like, okay, I see this in the instructions, but I'm not sure what you mean by this, or can you give me more detail on this? Or like for them to be able to ask questions, get clarifying get extra information, and then be able to adapt according to what information you're going to be able to communicate to them. I feel like it just makes it very realistically. It just makes it very realistic, sorry. On the job, that's what they'd do. They'd go through your spec, and if something was unclear, they'd ask a question and then they'd adapt. They rather than thinking, okay, this is an interview, I can't ask any questions, and maybe do something that they wouldn't have done if they'd have been able to ask that question. So I think leaving room for that sort of collaborative and having that conversation and the ability to adapt and change their answer, I think that makes it very much more collaborative and much more realistic. um do you think I think so I'm hoping that you can also share your screen, but I'd love it if we could have a look at an example of a question that is realistic and cheat proof. I think Frank, we had a bit of a chat prior to this about some questions that might be really useful to share. Do you think you could do that now?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share screen. I also see, I believe you can see my browser. Please
Yeah.
speak up if you cannot.
Yep.
Um, and so I also, but by the way, Jenny, I do see your question there. Good to see you again, by the way. Around time and space, and I think as we talk about it, it's both everything from having a realistic question that's business relevant, that has certain attributes about it, in a realistic environment where you have tools available to you. You can run code, that type of thing. As well as, you were asking about the time and space that we're seeing on the last slide. We also believe that the interview process should reflect, again, how people work. So having thought through this, in an asynchronous construct, what does that mean? There's If you're sending an async test, it's having a time limit to make sure that you're standardizing everyone's input. It actually matters if somebody has 40 hours of free time versus 2 hours of free time. And so having a set time limit, but then also giving people the ability to think. I think whether that's async or live, if you're talking to somebody, giving them the ability to spend a few minutes like gathering their thoughts. I think that is how people work, and then having this iterative conversation.
Mm.
So hopefully that answers your question, Jenny.
Mm.
Um,
And we have it. I just want to call out so we have a feature called focus time, and it literally just gives you that sort of space to not have your screen is not visible at that point. It's like a pause. You're able to sort of pause the interview, hide your screen, think, okay, I just need a minute to like rearrange this, to think about this, to catch my breath, and do it without thinking, oh my gosh, somebody is watching everything that I type. So I think it's really cool to be able to offer that feature as well.
yeah. So I have a problem up here, I guess transitioning to what you were asking about, realistic question. And you might be reading this and saying, this is not very realistic. And this isn't. I actually wanted to start with something that isn't realistic, just to give some context. And so what we see here is, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's about parking lots and spaces and so on. And nothing against those in the parking lot business, but this probably doesn't apply to 99% of businesses that are out there. And so, is this really business relevant? Is somebody actually solving a problem like this at your business? And honestly, from a candidate perspective, are they learning something about you, your code, what it's
Mm.
like to work there? In this case, if you are a travel business, this probably is not reflective of like the types of problems that would get a candidate excited. The other thing to note here is this is basically when we talk about leak code, and for those of us who aren't familiar, it's basically a fancy version, a CS version of a math test. And so if you're thinking about that, it's you know, engineers, and I think Nathan, would say a lot about this, are solving more complex problems that reflect businesses and reality and users. We're not sitting here solving math problems all day.
Mm.
And so I guess this of like optimizing parking spots and stuff is effectively a math test, and that's probably not the best example of something to be asking. So I'm going to shift over to a more realistic question. And so this is an example that we worked on with a customer where essentially they have a very popular video game out there, and we were trying to spark some inspiration in terms of the types of questions they can ask. And so when I say realistic, it's everything from the code that's in here to, this actually looks different. It's a little bit more, there's multiple files. It actually looks like a real dev environment. And then the things that we're asking somebody to do are actually reflective of what you would ask somebody to work on. Implement the search filter. So here on the menu, that you have the ability to like choose different characters, but there's no search function. And so one of the things we maybe talked about with users is needing to search through here. And so that is made, again, reflective of the type of question. And again, hopefully this speaks or showing is a little bit better than just telling you what a realistic question would be. Nathan, what else do you see here that kind of makes this realistic?
Yeah, I think that the thing that makes this realistic is, if the, game development studio is asking something like this is probably something close to a week one, hey, get up to speed with the code base, get familiar with what we do in our business. And it's something very, very contextually relevant for them. Also, it's something that you can build upon, right? So it's not just a, hey, solve this and we're done. You can start with the search filter problem, and then build upon this in real time, right? Like the best interviews I've had have had a prompt where you like, hey, I want to hit these 2 or 3 different problems to solve, but it also gives you the optionality to go into different directions. So a more complex, more relevant question for the business also gives you the options for candidates to sort of steer a little bit too, rather than just having a, hey, rebalance a red black tree for me, or solve a math problem, relating to parking lots when we're in the gaming business, which isn't particularly relevant. So I think really it gives something that's really, really relevant like this to the business. And again, to beat this example to death, close to week one, week two for a new employee coming on board, it gives you the ability to go a lot deeper than just something that's surface level, solve a
Mm.
CS problem, solve a very, very basic problem. So those are the things that stand out to me, and this is something that we encourage all customers to do: is come up with something that's relevant, come up with something that is as realistic as possible, as close as possible to their day one experience on the job.
Mm.
And
I
as
think
we kind of sorry, I'm like stepping on your toes again, Natalie.
go for it.
As this relates back to originally, I think we're establishing this is a realistic question. How that again, bringing this back to cheating. How does this relate to cheating,
That
and
was my
why?
question. That was literally what I was
Um,
going to say.
well, yeah.
I was going to
So
say,
I
let's
guess
talk
first
about that.
off, yeah. First off, when we talk about leak code questions, I think it's important to understand part of the training data that goes into building LLMs is actually a bunch of leak code questions. And so guess what? Not surprising, the LLM, the ChatGPTs of the world can solve those questions that they were in fact trained on. When you are using a custom question, you are inherently building something that the data set was not trained on. And so the ability to solve it goes down a lot. I think we have some partner studies here. Interview.io did one of these where They found that just a basic out-of-the-box leak code question can be solved 76% of the time. When you go down to a custom question, it goes down to 26% of the time. And so there's actual, studies that have been done that actually show uniqueness matters. Beyond that, I think you can get into a couple of different things. There's multiple files here. And so quite honestly, when you have just one file and one, in the environment that we're showing, which is how interviews were done, um, I think it's easier to just copy and paste all at once. And yes, we do have the monitoring and the blocking, the copy paste. You could see somebody did that. But here, where you have potentially multiple files, which again befits a realistic environment, you actually get into, okay, well, the LLM spat out a bunch of things. Now I have to go to multiple different places and change them in multiple different places. And it's actually operationally quite difficult. It spat out this code. Which file do I paste that back into? I actually have to know, a little bit more, and I can't just copy paste, hit submit, and be done with it. And so there's, a very real aspect here. Along with that, again, we're monitoring this environment. And so we do have something like an AI assist where you can ask, like, hey, help me, with whatever type of syntax. And this is, again, transparent to both the candidate and the interviewer. And so ultimately, it is bringing that tool into the tab so they're not having an excuse to leave. Like, hey, I need to go look something up quickly on Google when they're actually just Googling the entire question. And so it keeps them in the environment, but in a realistic way where they have access to these tools. And then finally, this question, again, trying to practice what we preach, is set up in a way that it has some depth. There's many different ways to implement a search filter, and you can follow up. And then there's potential stretch goals. You can keep going on and deeper into this should you have a pretty good advanced candidate, and so it allows you to stretch your legs and kind of understand their full depth of thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, I love this. I love this example. I'm so glad that we had the time to sort of get into this and show you what it looks like within the product, what it looks like practically, and what a realistic exercise can look like. I think I want to talk a little bit about communicating with candidates. I think one of the last things you mentioned here was the ChatGPT integration, and it just reminded me of I had a conversation with a hiring manager, and he said, like, every time he goes into an interview like this, like, and he sort of a little bit of a walkthrough through in the IDE, like, this is what we're expecting, this is what the IDE looks like, and what the interview is going to look like. And that sort of ChatGPT chat, he always gives an example of, like, so this is our AI integration. I encourage you to use it as you would on the job. And he gives an example of, like, for example, like, if I was doing this on the job and I'd type in blah, 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 just to sort of show what sort of queries are, like, okay, just to sort of take some of the, oh dear, am I going to be judged if I say, like, remind me of this? Just to sort of take some of that worry away for candidates who can be a little bit self-conscious of, like, people can see what I'm looking for. Are they going to think it's a silly question? So I think anything you can do within an interview, I just thought that was a really cool way to put candidates at ease. Um, and and yeah, I want to talk about what else you communicate to candidates and how you do that. We talked about at the beginning of our discussion, we talked about setting clear expectations, clear rules on tools, what you can use, what you can't use. What other information would you say that either TA or hiring managers should share with candidates before an assessment?
So I think even getting to the point, again, we're in an environment where I think we all understand candidate experience is really important, and you will lose your best candidates and get, when you don't provide the right experience for them. And so oftentimes one of the things we talk about and think about and try and communicate to candidates is, here's our goal out of the session. Here's what we hope
Mm.
you get out of the session. And so, in a realistic, hopefully realistic environment like this, in a more realistic question, we hope you get to understand what it's like to work here. We hope you get to learn about the problems that we're solving here. Um, and I think it sets that kind of two-way mentality of, an interview is as much an evaluation of the candidate, but also the candidate, at least the best candidates, are also evaluating your company. And this is what we hope to give you. Take it away,
Yeah,
Nathan.
I think yeah, anything you can do to make candidates feel like it's not a, one-way mirror where, they're, you're interviewing them and there's no back and forth, right? I think the worst interviews I've been a part of are, all, let me give a candidate a prompt and I'll sit for 40 minutes watching you solve a problem, right? Like the back to getting the best signal possible so you can make a good hiring decision. You want to encourage outside of being, giving examples. Natalie, you gave a great example of like, here's how you can use the tools, here are expectations. I think being clear about the candidate, this is, yes, you're solving problems, but this is a two-way conversation that is going to help us assess fit for you as a candidate evaluating a potential employer, and the other way around, right? I think candidates, interviewing is stressful for
Mm,
everybody, right? Anybody who's ever interviewed anywhere is, everybody's extraordinarily nervous. And I think anything you can do to, one, diffuse that a little bit, and two, encourage them to, this is a two-way conversation, right? You're solving problems
mm,
for us, and hopefully demonstrating that you've got the skills to, do the job and fit into the role that we're hiring for. But
mm,
please, pretty please, make this a two-way conversation and feel comfortable and open enough to have a, treat us like you're pair programming your first week, right? And I think
mm.
that's something that candidates have a hard time with, and something that, at least when we're interviewing and I've ever interviewed anybody for anything, it's something that you need to reinforce and talk about a lot with candidates, just to get them and prepare them well enough to have that, two-way conversation.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And I think to build on that, I wanted to share. So it's on our blog if you want to go and look for it. But we have worked on a couple of templates. These are more for TA, so our talent acquisition professionals who are in the audience today, or hiring managers, if you want to share this with your TA team. Sort of a template here was just a starting point for what you could send at the very beginning of your hiring process, what you could send before a async assessment, what you could send before an interview. And you can see that it goes like it's very much transparency. Um, that's how you're going to build trust with your candidates. Um, it goes into detail about like, yeah, I'm excited to guide you through the next steps of our recruitment process. Here's a detailed overview. This is what it looks like. This is why we're doing it. This is who you'll meet. This is what the platform will be. Like it gives you that context, transparency, and sort of it puts candidates at ease. You're like, we're not trying to catch you out. You know, we want you to know what to expect. We want to be able to support you. We want to be able to offer any adjustments or accommodations to make your process as inclusive as possible. Um, and then for an assessment, it's like, here are a few reminders, here are some tips on how they can best prepare, best set up. We mentioned like sharing the tutorial. I think that's a really, really, really good way to sort of give them the time to get comfortable in the environment. And then before an interview as well, again, it's sort of what to expect, what's going to happen in the interview, what we're going to talk about. Um, uh, Nathan, you mentioned pair programming. I think that's sort of the vocabulary here is like, we want this to be an interactive and realistic experience. Think tech interview meets pair programming. You're sort of setting the scene for your assessment process. And I think that can go a really long way. It seems obvious, it seems basic, but putting a little bit of energy into building those templates and making sure that that candidates get all of the information that they're looking to get, and you're putting them at ease, it's just going to be a better experience for you and for your candidates. I think let's see here. I want to make sure we have some time to get to questions from the audience. Sorry. I think one last thing I do want to talk about is we talked a lot about how you can prevent cheating or how you can build a process that's as cheat proof as possible, what you should pay attention to. But if there are signs, if you do suspect cheating, um, how should you approach that? What do you do? What are the next steps? Um, Nathan and Frank, do you have any advice that you would share on sort of, okay, I'm very suspicious about this candidate. What do I do?
Yeah, well, it depends where you are in the funnel, right? So if it's something a little bit top of funnel where somebody's taking an asynchronous screen, right? Like, our CoderPad screen does a really great job at highlighting things that we consider suspicious. So I think, if typically we see most of our TA audience manage that part of the process. So I think partnering with your hiring team and hiring manager to dig in to see like, hey, CoderPad screen is saying that this is suspicious. Can you take a look at this, see if there's anything that we should be worried about one way or another? That can lead to either a hiring manager saying, hey, there's, no big deal. Somebody copy and pasted stuff in here, but, they worked
That's
well
something.
through the problem otherwise, but and that's okay. In a live interview, it's a little bit trickier because if you get the feeling that somebody's cheating their way through an interview, it becomes if you're digging in deep with them and treating it like a real pair programming exercise, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. I think that's not something I would you're not going to go out and say, hey, you're cheating on this right now. That's not the best candidate experience in the world if they're cheating. I think it's just something that you would write down in your notes and then use it as something that could influence your hiring decision in one way or the other. So I mean that's how I've handled it typically. Frank, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess where you started was it depends a little bit of where you are in the funnel and like what gave rise to this. Like how sure are you about any of this that's been
Mm,
going on? And I think, yeah, thanks for the helpful kind of flow here, Natalie. But I think it starts with making sure that given the tools, hopefully you are using a tool, you should try and turn on all the features that we have. I think for us specifically, we're consistently putting out new features that do additional monitoring and so on. Again, we try and do so in a transparent way, but for example, just say, hey, you can't leave the tab, and we will absolutely flag that you've left the tab, or
mm,
or there are other things that we monitor for, like if somebody maybe submits code that we see somewhere else, or if somebody takes, submits what should be a 60-minute exercise in 2 minutes, and we'll flag
mm,
that. These are maybe like obvious things. And so that's then what you can come back with and say, like, hey, you know what? I see that you took something that normally takes people 60 minutes, you submitted in 2 minutes, you did so after leaving. I see that CoderPad tells me that you pasted in 1,000 lines of code. I think that makes it a little
mm,
bit of a more upfront, direct conversation versus where maybe you're like squinting and thinking like, well, you look to your left 3 times and therefore, I think at some point there's only so much. We're all human. We have
mm,
different quirkiness to how we act.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a gray area too, right? Because sometimes, like, if you just go back to the leak code questions, if you're asking a candidate a leak code type question and they go like, oh, I've seen this before and I've solved it before,
copy
maybe
paste.
it's yeah, maybe it's a particularly fine result for the hiring team that they know how to solve this problem and they just felt like it was, oh, hey, this was something I've done before, so I'm just going to submit something I've written before. That gives way to encouraging people not to ask questions that are well known and easily solvable, right? Like
Mm,
the more relevant questions that you give a candidate, the lower the probability is that they can do that. And so
mm,
um so yeah, I mean it's really about having a conversation and being open with and being clear about like, hey, here are the things I'm concerned about, or not. More often than not, these types of things land in a gray area rather than black or white.
mm. Absolutely. I think so. I've shared on the screen here sort of some of the steps. We actually have a Alice. I don't know if you've already shared it or not. I haven't seen in the chat. But we do have a blog article on sort of 9 steps to handling a suspicion of cheating. Um, Obviously, like you say, Nathan, there is gray area and it's possibly not quite so linear. But I think that article does give you sort of great structures like where do I start and what am I maybe forgetting as part of this investigation. Um, so yeah, if you do want to go and check that out, thank you. Thank you, Alice. I want to get to some of the questions that have been coming in from the audience. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in a question. So we do have a question here about Fraud. Do you help prevent fraud, ensuring the person you're interviewing is who they say they are? And unfortunately, that can happen, that somebody either pays someone else or asks a friend to take an interview in their place. I don't know how often it happens, but it can happen. How can we prevent that or identify it?
So there's a couple monitoring pieces that go into identity that we have baked into our product, and I think this is mostly applicable, in an async environment where you're sending out a test and you don't know who maybe is completing this test, and so I think two specific ones. One is around IP tracking, and so we do track where the test was sent to, and we, I guess, have documented cases, and so we do see this from time to time where it was sent to somebody, maybe Natalie, I send this to you in the south of France, and then suddenly I see it was opened up in Canada, and completed there, or started in the south of France and completed in Spain or whatever it is. And so these are oftentimes signals, and so that's one of the things that we take a look at. And then, as Alice is mentioning in the chat, we also have webcam proctoring, and so we have a mechanism to enable webcam to be able to monitor who's in the room, and there's certain triggers that we look for, such as somebody changing, is this different person than the person who started the test? Are there multiple people in the room? That type of thing. And then in our live interview, we also have because you're then conducting the interview live, we have a transcription tool. And so the transcription enables you to certainly focus your attention on the candidate and not have to worry so much about note taking. And then we also analyze the transcripts afterwards to kind of understand what was going on. And so all of these, kind of help a little bit of that fraud angle.
Mm. And I think just coming back to sort of what you communicate to candidates, I can't remember which article this is in, but there's also there is value in warning candidates that you do have features in place to flag any misconduct or suspicious activity, that will ensure that will result in disqualification or that kind of thing. Sort of just reminding, I mean, not necessarily being menacing, but just reminding candidates that you do expect them to work alone and that you do expect them to be who they say they are. Obviously, you can't say it like that, but you know what I mean. So any of the communication you can do around your assessment process, there is value in that, and I think that it does help to sort of warn and sort of have that preventative messaging. Nathan, was there anything you wanted to add for that one, or should I pick another question?
Nope, we've got a bunch of questions to work through.
Okay. So I have a question about do we have a bank of example questions for backend engineers? I want to say yes. I don't know if we have the time to go into some of our questions for backend engineers. I think we might be short for time to do that right now, but if you do want to reach out and find out more about our questions, our backend questions, I don't know, Alice, if you could share possibly any resources we have specifically on hiring backend engineers. I hope that would be useful. Frank, Nathan, was there anything you would share
No, I mean,
without sort of diving in?
yeah, CoderPad screen, we have well over 4,000 example questions. I would say half of those apply to backend engineers. CoderPad interview, we also have example questions for backend engineers that are like meant as a starting point if people need inspiration. So yeah, we have lots of those.
And we also have sample questions you can use from our bank, and then you have the possibility to personalize those questions, customize them however you want. You have the possibility to create your own custom questions, and we can support you in that as well. Another question about take homes. So I don't know if this question is specifically take home development projects that are bigger than sort of an asynchronous coding test. I imagine that's the question. So those projects that are, it is a little bit different in the format to the way that you would do an asynchronous coding test. How can we prevent or flag cheating for those projects that are not necessarily within the IDE, like our coding assessments and interviews?
Yeah, I mean, it lives in the same product. So all of the anti-cheat measures that exist in CoderPad interview, like are relevant to take homes as well. So we will flag things that we consider to be suspicious. So once a take home is completed, you can go into playback and take a look and see what the candidate did. And it's pretty easy to source, like, hey, this candidate copied and pasted 1,000 lines of code into this project, and they didn't spend much time in the pad, so that might be weird. So there's pretty much everything you get in CoderPad interview you would get for take homes as well, as far as cheating prevention and detection is concerned.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question. Does CoderPad allow me to see what a candidate is typing into Google, ChatGPT, etc.? If so, where can I learn more about this? I imagine the question is, do we enable you to see what the candidate is typing outside of the IDE? So I'll let
I think,
maybe Frank or Nathan, sorry.
yeah, I'll take it. So outside of the IDE, no, that would require for us to install an application on the candidate's computer, which we do not do. Inside of the IDE, yes, I'll drop a link to playback for a minute. So if you've enabled ChatGPT in a live interview, literally everything that's sent to ChatGPT and all of its responses are all logged in playback, so you can see exactly what they asked at any given point in time in the interview, and it goes right along with every single set of keystrokes that is made in the IDE. That you get a full playback for that. So it's sort of interwoven into that. And I'll drop, there's a document on playback that I'll drop in the chat too.
Yeah, I think the important point there is that not only do we have the keystroke by keystroke recording of everything going on within the tab, if something was pasted from the outside, and then we combine that with an ability or a notification if somebody has left the tab.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's usually, what somebody, and what's the length of time? Do they leave for like 2 seconds versus 20 minutes? How much do they paste in from elsewhere? I think those types of things are the signals that we do provide. But again, what we don't do is, for a bunch of reasons, we don't ask candidates to install a bunch of spyware onto their desktop computer to be able to monitor everything. And so we're trying to strike that balance of making our product easy to use. Somebody can enter without having to pre-install anything like that. But then also, what we're trying to do is not have excuses or reasons to leave the tab.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately that's where the monitoring comes in.
And I guess it's like just from a security data protection, there are things that you can't do or shouldn't do. And yeah, we wouldn't ever sacrifice security or respect of our candidates' data to be able to spy on their activity during an interview. So it's very clear to candidates and to you what is and isn't visible. For the live CoderPad interviews, will it show the IP address location? We talked about that for coding assessments. You do see the IP address location. Do we see that in live interviews?
We don't currently enable that. I mean, if that's something, I think that's something we've discussed here and there. I think part of it is also within the live interview, you are actually talking with somebody. And so I think the threshold of like mysteriousness of who's conducting this or who's typing this goes down quite a bit. And so I think, it's something we have talked about, but it's also, again, to your earlier point, we're trying not to just go ahead and slurp up collect a whole bunch of data that we might not necessarily need and then present that data in different ways. And so it is trying to walk that line of privacy. And in a live interview, I think what we lean on is that interviewer's there talking with you much in the way that we are right now. And so you kind of, that's how you're understanding who you're speaking with.
I think just one last very quick question. Do you have support for technical interviews for DevOps specialists?
Yes.
I
think we run the gamut. And when we talk about interviews, it's everything, anybody who with a role of who you consider a developer or engineer, down to marketing analyst, and some of these, they're technical roles, but not like sitting within the dev team. And that, we support all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you. We are just about at time, so I want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I am very glad to have had this conversation with all of you. Frank, Nathan, thank you again for taking the time and for all of your insights. If you do want to find out more about a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, do check out our blog. If you want to reach out, you can do so via email, via the website, any way you want. And I see that I think the poll is closed here, but yeah, we will definitely reach out to those of you who want to learn more. And yeah, I hope to support lots of you and talk to lots of you very soon and maybe see you in another webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Bye.